Welcome. Okay, well, welcome. My name is Michael Alvarez, and I'm one of the OSHA outreach trainers. I've been with OSHA since 1976, retired 2010, and then came back as a retired annuitant to do the outreach training, which started with heat illness prevention, and now obviously is we're dealing with night work. So what we're going to talk about today is night work safety. Next. And one of the things that I think that's important for us all to remember, even with night work safety, is the top citations that OSHA is issuing. And from 2019 to last year, obviously with the pandemic, there was a huge slowdown in terms of field inspections. But nevertheless, the injury and illness prevention program continues to be the most cited hazard in OSHA. And this is something that I think that everyone needs to put extra attention to pull up your injury and illness prevention program. Even though you may have your injury written program, is it up to date and is it being properly implemented? And that's the thing that OSHA, the inspectors, the enforcement inspectors are encountering, is the lack of properly maintaining that program. Along with that is the heat illness prevention written program, which has been on the books for quite a while, and field sanitation, reporting fatalities, serious injuries, operating of ag equipment, provisions of water for outdoor work. And again, it's also not just providing the water, but making sure that the water is clear and workers are encouraged to drink. The injury and illness prevention program with respect to the record keeping provisions, heat illness prevention training. And, I'll emphasize the training, not just on heat illness prevention, but also the injury and illness prevention, all the other work that requires training, including night work, that it has to be real, it has to be documented, and the employees have to understand what they're being trained on. And what the inspectors are going to do is they're going to pull the workers aside and ask them questions regarding their the training topics and and how they understood provisions of shade and lockout and tagout. Okay, next slide. Now, within the injury and illness prevention program, as it applies to night work, one is who's responsible for the night work and the procedures themselves. So again, you want to make sure that that's all well written and it's understood. In other words, if you have a person there identified as the one that's responsible for the night work safety and provisions, that person actually does exist and that they're at the work site. Compliance, communication, hazard assessment falls right along with the IIPP. Accident exposure investigation, this is all related to night work. Hazard corrections, obviously those hazards are going to be different from night to day. Training and instructions, and again, this is just on heat illness, where you were given specific training and instructions on heat illness prevention. This one will be on night work. Employee access to the injury and illness prevention program, and those components involving night work and record keeping and documentation. Next slide. Okay, night work safety. And now we're going to get right into the core of this. Some of the new changes at night work requirements, hazards, dangers, and dangers in night work. Also the best practices. And this is something that within your industry and your group, if someone discovers that, there's a better way of doing this, or there's better lighting systems, share it, talk amongst yourselves, because again, it's for your own safety. What are some of the hazards during night work? And also, does heat illness prevention needed during night work? Absolutely. Given the fact that, yes, the sun's not there and adding to the heat, but, the heat factor is still there, even though it cools down, and a lot depends on the geographical areas. Also now with the wildfires and the smoke, it's adding to the heat factor, and as well as even the humidity. Okay, next slide. Okay, start of night work. One obviously is the equipment. What equipment are you going to use? Are the right provisions there adequate? The safety instructions, are they all in place? Field inspections for the hazards. And again, as you can see on that photograph, you got somebody that's standing up on working on the tower of lights. You may have someone there on the equipment itself. It looks like a group of workers there on the side, maybe getting some instructions. And then you may need to have someone walk up and down the field there, making sure that all conceivable hazards are identified and they're taken care of. Personal protection, high visibility vests, personal lighting. Is that all in place? Batteries, that's huge. During the training, that some of the complaints that I've received, that they're given the lights, the equipment, and then the batteries are worn. So after 1 or 2 hours of work, the lights start to falter, and there's no replacement batteries, or they got the wrong batteries. So make sure that all that's been checked and it's in place. Communications between the workers, the operators. Again, it's critical, mostly in the equipment operators and the workers that are on the ground. Okay, next slide. Okay, requirements, the new standard now that which took effect on July of 2020. And there wasn't much interaction with that, because again, that was during the peak of the pandemic, and a lot of work was suspended. But now that we're getting back into it, that's, just be aware of the standard, the lighting in terms of lux, safety meetings, that is effective, high visibility garments. One thing that I think that we've all been accustomed to seeing is that, when you're going down the highways, there's a lot of highway work at night, and you see all the different types of lighting provisions that they have, and even some of these garments, how well lit up they are, because again, it's not seeing the person in front of you, but more on your peripheral vision, seeing those along the side. Headlights and taillights on the equipment. Again, I'll get into a little bit more on the detail on that as to how much lighting is required. Next slide. I had talked about visibility both ways. I say, all the way around, behind you, to the sides, and as well as in front. Also, the moving lighting equipment. You have those that are on the individuals, and then you have those on the equipment, and then you also have those that are mobile. On that lower photograph, you can see on the lower right, equipment light on that tractor, even facing back. And then you have like a big gigantic light bulb there, and then the individuals having their own lights. System of inspecting the lighting. So in other words, things change in a work site, and so you want to make sure that sufficient light and the lights carried also in those areas. One thing of caution in addition to that, not just the work areas, but to and from. So in other words, somebody has to use the toilet or the restrooms or wash areas, that there's sufficient light to and from there, as well as in those staging areas as well. Equipment versus workers, and also the tiredness, sleepiness. Some of the training, I've talked to some of the workers out there, and Lord behold, guess what? Some of them also are holding day jobs. It might be part-time. Maybe they're working 8 to 10 hours at night, and maybe 4, 6, or even 8 hours in the daytime. And then you factor in the travel time. It doesn't leave much time to sleep. And we know as a fact that you do this 3, 4, 5 days out of that week, it's going to tear on and wear on you. And that's when, the fatigue sets in. For example, that driver there, let's just say he's been going 3 days with just 3 hours of sleep. You're really at a high risk of having an accident, misjudging, and or even falling asleep on the equipment, and it happens. So make sure that those issues are addressed. Next slide. Okay, illumination, levels of illumination. How much lighting do we need? As I mentioned earlier, lighting to and from, let's say, from your work area to the restrooms, and you get into the staging areas for the restrooms. How much light do you need? And that will be measured in terms of lux, and it runs between 32 and 53, or let's just say 60. It's better having more than not enough. And moving parts of machinery, that's that photo on the far right side, the person there right at the outfeed of that harvester. you're going to need it at a minimum of about 107 lux. And then the task lighting maintenance, we're working on equipment, that one, because you've got some integral parts of the equipment. Maybe you're troubleshooting something. At a minimum, you need to have at least 215. And then you ask, well, what's a lux and how do you measure a lux? Next slide. There's your answer. A meter, a light meter. And, this is one that, and I'm not advocating this brand or anything. It's a brand that I bought myself. If I'm going to do the training, I better know how to use it. So anyway, I actually purchased one and used it, and it works quite well. And just keep in mind, you don't need to have one at every work site. One would be set up your lighting that you normally would and measure and record and document what it registered as. And then always give yourself a range, an extra range. So in other words, if the required lighting for that particular area is 100 lux, and your thing is showing 120 lux, and you think, okay, well, that's about 20% more. That's good then. I'd rather have a little bit more because things do change, and then you record that. So as you move in from field to field and night to night, that amount of lighting will keep you out of harm's way and hopefully provide you with sufficient lighting, because that's what the Kellosh inspectors are going to do. They get a complaint that there's not enough lighting. They're going to take a meter of their own, one that's state issued. They're going to measure, and if they find that it's lacking, and then you can be liable for a citation. Okay, next slide. Well, how does this work? Well, one, you got the photo detector, the little bulb on the top, number one. You have the display. So as you point that bulb to an area that you're measuring, it will display what the lux are. So in other words, right there, it's registering 203. You got your control buttons. And then also you have your button there for your battery, and also your functional buttons in the bottom, which is from the lux, the calibration, and also the maximum range memory buttons, and then also the data hold button. Okay, next slide. And again, they're not that difficult to use. I mean, you just about any electronic component, if you have somebody there that's really savvy with electronics, makes it a lot easier, and practice with that and measure, and then that way you know what you have, and then when you actually go out and take your true measurements. The meter measures the intensity of the light that strikes the sensor dome and foot candles and lux units. When you look at the standard, that's what it will require, that the lighting be measured and or provided in foot candles and lux units, and that be displayed in the value on its LCD on that screen. Also position the meter and light source so that the light strikes the sensor dome straight on with as little angle as possible. And I'll show you in the next slide what I mean by that. Next. So I'm out here, and let's just say I'm going to measure our work area. So as you can see, you have three different sources of light. On the upper left, you see a source of light. The workers themselves, where the arrow's pointing, they have their own individual light. And then you have the equipment on the bottom of the screen in the center where it's projecting light. So the looms is the amount of light being projected. So, from where that tractor is, that's the light that's going out. So you don't want to put the light meter right up at that source of light, because it's practically going to go off the chart. What you want to do is put that light meter right where that arrow is pointing in the area where you're working. And that will display actually the amount of light that the workers are working in, and whether in fact you need more lighting there, whether it can be done from the personal lighting or the equipment down below being a little bit closer. Next slide. Again, as I mentioned, more looms will provide more lux and greater lighting distance. You see the headlight, the headband there with the light as the workers are up there and on the upper left, looking down, which is projecting right down into the work area. So in terms of purchasing and or trying to select the needed light, keep in mind you see a split screen there. One is that where it shows flashlight 30 looms, and then above that is 50 looms. You might, if you're purchasing one, you might think, oh well, the 30 looms is let's just say X $20. 50 looms is $25. Well, I'm going to get the cheaper one and go with that. Well, there again, less looms will also translate into less lux, and that's what you're measuring. On the bottom one, it says, okay, the running time for that lighting system is 2 hours for the batteries, and also the distance is 20 meters. So you probably get right around, maybe a little less than 30 lux at 20 meters, right in that range. The 50 looms obviously is going to give you more lux. The range is 40 meters, so it's twice the distance, and the time's the same. So again, those looms translates more looms, more lux, and then also the distance factor. So the bottom line is that you get the meter and you measure in your work area to determine how much more lighting you need or whether you have sufficient lighting. Next slide. And this is something that I think has been in the books for a while, the equipment having, sufficient lighting, at least one headlight where it projects out at least 50 feet. So again, just as what I was talking before, the amount of looms that you need, and the projection of light and how far up ahead that you need it. This one is 50 feet. But if you're using the equipment's lighting for workers that are working up in front, that may change. You may end up needing more lighting, like a few slides ago where it showed that the equipment actually had this apparatus of additional lighting hooked onto the tractor itself. So, and then and for the rear, again, a lot depends on what's going on back there, but at least you have to have sufficient lighting in the back and set up to where if people are coming in from behind, approaching the vehicle, you want to make sure that they're being able to be seen. Also, if you have a PTO and you're working on equipment that the tractor is hauling or is attached to it, you want to have sufficient lighting for that. Okay, next slide. Okay, the level of lighting can include a variety of lighting methods that include equipment lights and or individual hands-free. And here's a good illustration of that. On the left, you see the tractor, which as I mentioned before, with the apparatus there where it has additional lights, and you can see the workers there working directly in front. And again, be cautious that everyone is seen and accounted for, and you don't start moving forward and then end up running over somebody. The thing that concerns me on that photograph is to the side, and this is a reason why it's so critical to have sufficient lighting and the high visibility warning, the garments, the vest, and some actually have little blinking lights on the vest to catch the peripheral attention and vision of those operators, because as you're coming up to the side of that equipment, you can see it's pretty pitch black and dark. And then the workers on the right where they had their headlights and also there may be even additional lighting. It looks like additional lighting also being projected there so that they have sufficient lighting in their work area. Okay, next slide. There's not quite, it's not very difficult or cumbersome to figure out how much light we need. The main thing is to understand what pieces of equipment and the amount of illumination it projects, how much we need, and the tool, the meters that can be used to measure this. You document this. Training is critical, training of the operators, training of the workers. And if you go into our website, we have a host of training materials that you can use. It's public domain, so it's for your use. There's no cost to that, and it's both English and Spanish, and some of it even in tri languages. So feel free to visit our website and use the information that we have. And I thank you for your time. Thank you.